Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Inception. The one thing that in my brain just kind of fires off while I watch this film is like, Tom Hardy's in this film? Okay, that seems interesting. So, like, I didn't for the life of me think that Tom Hardy was in this film. And because I know, like, Christopher Nolan tends to reuse people in other films. And so, like, I immediately was to, like, okay, Michael Caine's in this film. Of course he is. Because Nolan just a lot of times works with Michael Caine with stuff. Like, look at Interstellar. Like, Joseph Gordon-Levitt is in this movie, and he was technically in The Dark Knight Rises, as well as Tom Hardy was. So, it seems like Christopher Nolan tends to keep working with the same people a lot, for whatever reason. So, it seems that these characters are to have certain job titles for them, because we do have this kind of dream heist of a film, and so we end up having characters like Tom Hardy, who comes in as Ames, who, of course, is to be this forger who is to appear as other people to whoever their target is to try to convince them to do certain things. And we also have Arthur, who is to be the kind of the behind the scenes guy, who is to be kind of like the producer, like the person who is to do all of the kind of storyboarding and figuring everything out, and kind of doing a lot of like background and research and all that kind of jazz. Like, Arthur is that guy. And we have, of course, Cobb, who at some point was an architect, but then is to switch over and to be much more of a director kind of guy, who's to tell everybody where to go and what to do, and is to also kind of persuade people through this dream. So, and then we have Saito, who's kind of just the money guy, the guy who goes on to the mission to kind of see that it is to get accomplished, and like that's really all this guy really has up his sleeve here. We have Yusuf, who of course would be like the sedative guy, the drug guy, who is to kind of be a body to eventually go and wake everybody up at a certain time. And we also have Nash in the early part of this film that is to wake both Arthur and Cobb up in their early mission. So yeah, like a cluster of like interesting things here. So let's go on and break this movie down and say, I think I like this movie mostly because its visual appeal. Like, we probably don't have Doctor Strange or any of the Doctor Strange stuff without this movie. And going into a Doctor Strange-like movie every single time I think I go into one of those, I immediately just pop into my brain and like, oh yeah, Inception. And so I think that was my main reasoning for wanting to go and see Inception again, simply because it's been such a long time since I've seen it. Even though there might be a part or two or whatever in this film that seems confusing, and there's a lot of things going on with it, and there's also some interpretations to be had of like how you feel this movie has ended, or like how you're trying to understand things as they are to play out. So yeah, really just an interesting film. Like, I think I don't 100% enjoy or understand the story part of it, but I think it wins me over with visuals easily. But this is probably not a film that I'm going to go out of my way and rewatch again anytime soon. Like, I feel like if somebody has probably never watched this film and I'm with them and this is still to be a convenient thing for them to see, I'm like, hey, yeah, let's go on and let's watch Inception. Like, that's a fun film. That's an interesting visual film. But, and if they've never seen it, just like that seems a convenient no brainer. Or if it's just conveniently on TV somewhere, then I might go and rewatch it because it's convenient. But other than that, it's not a film that I want to ever go out of my way and like just, man, I want to go and find this film and rewatch it again. Because there's just a lot of moving parts in here. It's like it's a fun, like, I don't hold a high regard for heist movies, and so I think that's kind of my only real complaint here is like I'm I don't enjoy heist films. I can enjoy like an Avengers Endgame time heist just because I've invested in those characters, and so whatever they're to do in those movies, like it really doesn't matter at this point as long as they just keep popping them out. But yeah, but overall, like Army of the Dead, I kind of complained that it's like, yeah, it's a heist movie. so so yeah, with that said, I think I just want to get into spoilers. Conveniently, where can you go to watch this film? Because if you have an HBO Max subscription, you can dare in fact watch Inception. Unless you want to go somewhere else and rent or buy this film, or maybe you already have it in your DVD or Blu-ray collection somewhere collecting dust, thinking like, yeah, let me bust this one back out for whatever reason. So, so yeah, there are plenty of number of other apps that I can go and dare in fact tell you where else to go. I have gone and talked about these through a number of other reviews, and so you can probably go through and check these things out. Uh, if you go onto a Google Play Store search, you can search the word movie apps, and I think that this app still exists within that search. You can go and see an app called Play HD TV and download that app, and you should be able to pretty much dang near see everything, with some sort of exceptions of another app that I can guarantee you to go on to check out. Go onto a Google search and search an app called Letter C Movies, so one letter and one word, and you should be able to see kind of like the second half of basically everything. Combining those two apps together, you can pretty much dang near see everything. And there might be like a rando kind of app that might just have one thing that these apps don't, like a TV Crush or something like that. There's a number of apps that I've recommended through a number of time of me being here that you can basically dang near see everything. So go ahead and check all those out. You can conveniently watch a ton of movies for absolutely free. So let's get into that double five. Let's get into that double time spoiler moment, because let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time I'm going to spoil this movie. So hopefully I'm going to get every bit and piece and whatever. This is like a 2 hour and change film. So hopefully I'm going to remember everything, because there's just a lot of stuff to break down here. So let's go into it. So, very beginning of this movie, we have, of course, Cobb, who is to be on this beach, this rocky beach, all of a sudden facing a Japanese palace. So, we seem to have these guys who are to go and find Cobb and bring him to a guy named Saito. And so they're telling Saito that this guy was delirious, but he was to go on and ask for Saito by name. So Saito is to go on and meet Cobb and mention how kind of how Cobb was, that he was he had reckless ideas, and that he was kind of this like this so and so kind of person. So we transition to that almost being like the ending of this film being put in the very beginning of it. So we transition now to another place, to a Nijo castle, or Nijo, Nijo castle, that is to just be some castle in place for the early stages of this film. So we have Cobb here going and trying to sell Saito on the fact that the most dangerous thing for a person to have is an idea. And that Cobb is trying to go on to sell Saito on a dream defense system that Cobb will eventually teach Saito how to defend himself from anyone coming in to try and steal something from his brain, from his mind, where a lot of things of an idea or some kind of something would eventually be locked away in some kind of vault or some kind of safe somewhere secretly for some thief to go and try to find and collect from Saito. Maybe it's maybe it's simply a password to something. Maybe it's a bank account number. Maybe it's his social security number. Who knows? So we have Cobb trying to sell Saito on this, and it seems that Saito is kind of won over by this whole presentation. So we have both Cobb and we have Arthur, who are kind of going on and kind of checking out the castle, kind of shaking hands with people, meeting and greeting. And so Arthur is trying to get Cobb on task and telling him it's like, hey, like, we're on the clock here, like, don't mess around. Because all of a sudden Molly is to appear in this whole mission. And so eventually we'll find out more about Moll, is what they usually keep calling her, but her actual name is Molly. So Molly goes on and is to eventually be Cobb's kryptonite in every single one of his missions. And eventually we'll figure out why in the story playing out. So while we have this going on, we also have a guy named Nash who is watching over both Arthur and both Cobb and Saito, because this whole mission is actually a dream. And they're trying to get Saito to reveal this information. So we then go on, and what is to happen is both Arthur and Cobb are to re-meet back up with Saito, to have Saito go on and explain to both Cobb and Arthur that Molly had found Saito, and Molly had told Saito everything. And that now the jig is up. So we have it where Molly goes on and is to shoot Arthur in the leg and then shoot him to kill him off here. And now Arthur is to wake up, and so Arthur is telling Nash to go and wake up Cobb, and Nash can't wake up Cobb. So Arthur's like, hey, you're going to have to dunk him. So Nash goes and tips Cobb over into this tub of water. He falls over and he then wakes up, realizing that they had failed their mission all because of Molly, because Molly is to be a problem that continues to appear in Cobb's dreaming state. Even if it's not actually his dream they're going into, Cobb always has these things that always appear to prevent them from being able to do their missions. We have at one point where Cobb is to have this kind of random train bulldozing its way through a number of cars randomly in one part of their dream heist. And so we have Molly, who just continues to appear, and she is the villain of this story, technically. That is to consistently try and stop these characters from doing what they're doing. And Molly is to always be Cobb's kryptonite, weakness, whatever. And Cobb is to always be a person that has to always double check if he is in reality or not. Going and taking this one little spinning like toy and testing if it is to drop, to where he can go on and assume that this is to actually be reality. We also have Arthur, who is to have loaded dice, where we don't actually see him use this, but like he has the item. So we have both Cobb and Arthur trying to scramble out of there, trying to escape from Saito quickly, and we eventually have both Cobb and Arthur getting caught by Saito, because Saito is to hold a gun to Nash, forcing both Cobb and Arthur to now come back for him. And so Saito is to tell both Cobb and Arthur that you had failed your mission that he had put together. And so now Saito is asking both Cobb and Arthur if there's a possibility that there can be an idea implanted in someone's brain to then make them do something and follow up with it. And so the guys are like, well, technically it has been done, but it's really difficult to do. It's a real massive task to try to do this, because Arthur is to tell Saito, it's like, well, hey, here's the thing. Like, if I'm to tell you to not think of elephants, what are you going to do? And Saito's like, well, obviously think of elephants. And Arthur's like, yeah, like, that's reverse psychology. But, like, that's something that you're going to temporarily do. Like, that's a temporary idea. Like, this thing that Saito is asking is something that a person is going to have a driving force to do and follow it up and live with that decision for the rest of this person's life. So, like, it's a lot more difficult than that, and they have to go on and come up with the reasoning for why this guy needs, in his own mind, to do this. So we have Cobb and Arthur having Saito go on and say, it's like, well, okay, like, I'm gonna flip the bill for this whole job as long as you guys get this accomplished. So Cobb is like, well, okay, I'm gonna end up putting a team together, and so the very first thing that Cobb is to go on and do, and is to find a like some school teacher named Miles, and so Cobb had worked with Miles once before, and I guess Cobb was to be taught by Miles how to do what he is to do, and so now Cobb is asking Miles to go and get him another architect that is to be as good as he was in his prime. And Miles is like, well, I can go and find you someone better. So we have Adrian, or Aradian, or Aradney, Aradney. We have Elliot Page's character, Aradney, good God, Aradney. It's a goofy name. So we have Elliot Page's character who is to come in, and Cobb is going to tell her to do a 2-minute maze that is to take 1 minute to accomplish. And so we go on and we have kind of some stumblings to figure this out, but eventually Elliot's character is to figure the thing out, to go on and have Cobb just be like, oh, okay, like, sold. But Cobb needs to go on and teach this girl more things. Teach her how to be a dream architect, and kind of ask her questions and help her to figure things out. We also have Cobb, who is to go on and get Ames. And when Cobb is trying to get Ames, we also have Cobb, who is to be chased, and there's to be a tail chasing after him. And so Cobb is to go on and try to scramble away from this tail, to have Cobb go on and re-meet up with Saito. And Ames is like, well, hey, like you couldn't get away from your tail? And Cobb's is like, no, this is another tail. And so Ames is like, okay, all right. So it seems like Ames is interested in working on this job and easily says yes to it. So we go on and we are to find out that the idea is that Saito wants this guy named Robert Fisher, who is going to come into this empire that his father Maurice is to give Robert and inherit this company because he's going to die soon. And so Saito's idea is to have Robert go and split off this empire, and to possibly have this empire crumble, so that way Robert doesn't have all the power, I guess. I guess it seems that Saito and the Fisher Company are to be at odds with one another. So Saito is trying to derail this other company, so he can eventually kind of breathe easy to not have any kind of competition, I guess. So we go on and we now have to have people figure out the right phrasing for Robert to, through all of these phases of these dipping further and further into Robert's dream, Like, what all are they going to uh, kind of insert in there to more and more go into, of course, Robert's mind to make him think that he is to come up with this decision on his own to want to split this company up, split this empire up. So while they're coming up with that, we have Cobb, who is trying to teach uh, Eridan how to Iridian, sure. Uh, I like Eridan a lot better. Or Iridian, sure. Teaching her how to basically dream and how to control her dream. Because Cobb is to be with Iridian at this one part of town. And so they go on and they talk, and so Cobb is asking her, because he's kind of drawing this whole like thing of how like dreams work, and then Cobb is telling Iridian, like, hey, how exactly did we get here? Like, how exactly did we transition from this spot? And so Elliot Page's character is realizing that she's like, oh, we're in a dream. And once Iridian is to realize that she's in this dream, she all of a sudden is to start having things pop off. Explosions are happening. And because once you have the person figure out they're in this dream, then that's when chaos starts happening. And that's when it seems that people in the dream start attacking the not host person that's kind of piggybacking on this dream. So Radiant is going on with Cobb and is to go through this dream. And at one point they're in Paris, France, and we have the Burr Hakeim Bridge that's in Paris. The Birhakeim Bridge. And it's like hyphened between the R and the H. We have this bridge that these two are going through, and we start to have Iridian going and starting to fabricate stuff from her memory to use in this dream. And Cobb is telling Ellen Page's character to not do that. Like, that she has to come up with something from scratch and not tie in her memories, because once she does that, all of a sudden that's when all of these people are to go on and start looking at them and wanting to attack them and wanting to kill them, because they want them to leave this dream because they're tampering with it. They're adjusting it. And so all of a sudden we end up having Molly appearing here. And so Molly goes on and is to kill Iridian in her dream. And so Molly is to wake up and just be like, oh my god. So Iridian is to go on and talk about the girl that was in the dream, and Arthur's like, oh, you met Molly. Like, that's Cobb's wife. And so Radian's going on and like telling of course, like, Cobb, it's like, hey, like, nice wife you got there. And so Arthur is to tell Elliot Page's character that Cobb's wife is dead, and that the whole reasoning of like this girl is to consistently appear is actually out of Cobb's control. So it wasn't something that he planned to have happen. It just continues to happen regardless. And so we have Iradian trying to figure out like more and more about Cobb, and when the both of them start to go under, we start to have Iradian uh, go and try to dip into Cobb's mind and go through this elevator of memories that at first Cobb is to showcase to this girl, but then she turns around and goes into the basement of things and looks into the deep dark secrets of Cobb and is to find out more about Cobb. And so we have where Cobb is to show Elliot's character about his two kids, and that at some point she is to go into the basement to go on and see Cobb's wife Molly at her worst. And so Cobb is to go on and explain that Cobb and his wife had gone on into the dream world for a very long time, like 150 some odd years in the dream world, like as if they went and like took a coma. And so they end up creating a life for one another. They end up possibly creating kids for one another. And so they spent such a long time in this dream world, and when they were to finally wake up from it, we still had Molly, who was still convinced that she was still in the dream world, and that she wants to go and figure out how she is to go and make her way back to her kid. Because we also had it where Cobb was to do even more horrible things to Molly, which eventually ties to this whole train thing. Because, of course, we had Cobb, who is to go on into Molly's mind and is to basically put this little trinket into this vault and have Molly lose the ability of being able to tell what's real and what's fake anymore between the dream world and reality. And so Cobb realizes what he had done was wrong, but there's nothing that he can do to take that back. And so Cobb had just felt so guilty that Cobb was trying to keep Molly into the dream world. And so we end up having both Cobb and Molly who are to kind of place themselves on this train and have them seemingly almost getting run over in some part of this movie, which creates the visual of the train in the film. So, like, going really deep down, diving into all of this stuff right now, but that doesn't all happen right in this one fell swoop of a thing. But I'm just talking about it and just breaking it down right now. And not doing a perfect job, I'll admit that, but just trying to do my best to just go and talk every bit about this film. So, now that Aridin, I don't even know if I'm even saying this close to right. If I'm saying it wrong, I do apologize. And yeah, I'm going to consistently keep probably having to say that name numerous times, much more so than anybody else, it seems. So, besides, hopefully we can get to a point where you can say Cobb or Robert or something else more. So, we go on and we have to have these guys out for a very long stretch of time. And so they want to have a controlled sleep where they are going to supposedly be out for possibly 10 hours. And so they have to figure out what plane ride that Robert is going to be on that lasts 10 hours. And Saito is to buy the whole airport that Robert is to go into, so like they can just easily figure out when Robert is going to go on some plane ride somewhere. So they break it down to just be like, okay, well, God, so they break it down to figure out how they're going to go on and do this. So Ames is to go on and meet a friend of the family called Browning, and so Ames is to go and see the kind of mannerisms of this guy, see how he kind of like holds himself, and Ames is to go on and see kind of Ames talking to Robert, while Robert is also going on and talking to his soon-to-be dead father. And so by the time that Robert is to get on this plane, his father is to pass away. And so back to that whole sedative thing. So all over the place. So Yusuf is to have a sedative that, of course, is to be a 4-hour sedative. And when you slap somebody, they don't wake up. So we now have them with like, oh, okay, we figured this all out now. Now we need to go on and do this whole mission because we've easily figured it all out. So now they go on the plane, and so we of course have Cobb having Ames go and pickpocket Robert, and Cobb is to retrieve his wallet back to, or I think his passport. It's either his passport or his wallet back to Robert, and so that way Cobb can also drug Robert's drink. And so after it seems that Robert is out, we have the kind of the stewardess kind of closing up certain parts of the plane so they can kind of do whatever they want here. So now Robert's asleep, and so now everyone else has to eventually get there. So the very beginning of this is to at first go on and have Robert go on to this taxi that everybody is kind of waiting for him to take. And so Ames is going on and making his way on into this cab where Robert is taking. And so Ames is like, oh, I thought that this was a free cab. And Robert's like, no, it's not. It's not a free cab. So all of a sudden we have Saito, who's to hold a gun on Robert. And so all of a sudden now we have, of course, Robert trying to defend himself in his dream. And all of a sudden we end up having these army of men just come on and just appear here and try to have a shootout to take down this taxi. And like these guys are kind of caught off guard here because they're like, oh my god, we didn't realize that this guy would have this like heavily defensive measure for us to try and like get after him. But so we go on and we have the team go and retrieve Robert, and they're all wearing ski masks. And so Robert is to now be cuffed, and supposedly Browning is getting beaten up in the other room, but it's not Browning, it's Ames. And so Browning appears to Robert and trying to convince him about some will that has a combination. And so Robert needs to know the combination to this safe about this will, that Browning was to say that Robert's father was to give Robert the option of what he wanted to do with this company. So Browning is looking disheveled, beaten up, and whatever. And so Browning is trying to convince Robert to tell them the combination to the safe. And so then Cobb comes in all ski masked up and is to now have Robert like have a certain combination of this safe because Browning is just getting nothing. Browning is to consistently ask Robert, like, well, is there any kind of like number combination between the two of you that you would think that your father would have for this safe? And we really just have consistently at every point in time Robert is saying like, no, like my father like with his last dying breath was just consistently like criticizing me and consistently belittling me. And so we have Browning here that is to like, well, like there has to be some kind of something. And Robert's like, no. So we then have Cobb just ask Robert, it's like, well, hey, like, what random numbers can you just come up into your, that pops in your brain right now that is going to be a combination possibly to a safe? And so Robert just comes with a random number of combination, and so they're like, okay, good enough. So they go on and they take Robert, and so we all of a sudden, while these guys are going and fighting off Robert's brain defense, I believe, we at some point have Saito, who is to get shot here, and a lot of the guys are immediately thinking, well, hey, like, if we die here, like, he'll just wake up. And Cobb's like, no. Because here's the problem. These guys are to go on and be sleeping and be sedatively sleeping. So if Saito is to die right here and now, he'll eventually go on to limbo and possibly never wake up because his brain won't allow it. And so now they're like, oh my god, so we can't die in the dream or we're going to die for real kind of thing. It's kind of like Stay Alive. And so we have Cobb who's like, yeah, like you guys can't die here. No matter what goes on, you can't die. Or like you're gonna just be a vegetable forever, basically. And they're like, okay, great. And we had the guy who was to give them the sedatives know this, and he was promised Cobb's half because Cobb wants to just go back to his supposedly kids and Miles, and that's all he concerned about is about going to the States, because once Molly was to end her own life by jumping off this building, Cobb immediately was to leave the country, and there was no way for him to want to make his way back into the country. And so he ends up going and is calling his kids to mention that he's going to send them presents. And so we end up having at certain times whether or not, like, Cobb being a parent is a real thing or not. Maybe it's some kind of fabrication, especially with the way that this movie is to end here. So, but going back to the story, so I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but we'll kind of get there. We'll kind of get this all. Like, there's a lot to digest in this film. There's a lot of like little bits and pieces and parts to eventually just ram out and talk about here. So now, since the first part of things wasn't exactly working out, and so now the next thing is that they need to go further into Robert's brain and input more things in it. Now they have to go under again, but this time around, so we have Yusuf, who is to be the guy in a van driving these guys around while they're to be sedatively sleeping, and he is to have a amount of time for them to be in this dream and to then be woken up. So once we get past this one part, these guys are to realize they're on a timetable, and for how long that they are to already be in this dream, now they have even more time when they go deeper and deeper, and Saito isn't going to be in as much pain from this bullet wound as he will be once they go deeper and deeper and deeper. So once we go into this second level of dream, we now have to go and have Cobb convincing Robert that there is a dream heist going on and he is not the culprit of this. Cobb is to be the one that is to help Robert out of this whole thing, and he is to be this this officer that's trying to help Robert out here. That Cobb is to, of course, see this blonde woman as possibly being this thief that is trying to steal from Robert, and we end up finding out that it's just Ames instead, fabricating himself as some random blonde woman. So we have Cobb having to forcibly explain to Robert the truth technically here, because at one point in this dream, there of course is to be a much more bumpy road ahead, where it's obviously going to show that this is to be a fake world, because there's going to be a lot of turbulence, there's going to be a lot of like earthquake things happening in this world, so Robert could easily realize that this world isn't actually his world. So Cobb now has to come up with a reasoning for this happening. So we end up having Ames go and follow Browning around, because now Browning is to be the tell to see if if Robert is actually buying this whole story. And Saito was to go on and talk to Browning, and Browning is actually legitimately Browning, and Saito's like, oh, my bad, because he actually sees Ames's character. And so they go on and they start following Browning, and so eventually Browning is to re-meet up with Robert and kind of discuss all of this. And so Robert and Browning are kind of having this discussion, and it seems that Robert is convincing himself of what's going on here because Browning is to mention about Robert's father and kind of bring up things that they ended up justifying before in the other dream. And so it seems that Robert is going and taking this advice from technically himself to go on and work with these people, because these people have convinced now Robert to eventually go with these people into a deeper part of another dream. And so now Arthur is to go and be the guy that's to be the person that is going to have to go and wake up this team from this deeper dream. And Arthur is to also go and have to beat up some guys that are to try to make their way to waking these characters up from their dream. And so Arthur is going to have to beat up these characters, but he's going to have to beat them up while his environment no longer has gravity at some point, because he's starting to fly around in this scene here, because we eventually have Yusuf, who is kind of having no gravity in quite a bit of parts in the world that he's in, driving these people around. And there's quite a bit of points where like his van is flipping around, and he's getting into car accidents, and he's going on and making it to this bridge where eventually he's going to fall off the side of this bridge to eventually drop into this water that eventually wakes everybody up. So now we have, of course, Arthur going on and needing to figure out how exactly that these people can get kicked or woken up. Because we explained the whole kicking thing, where we have one point where Arthur is sleeping and he's to be kind of having his chair just kind of be tipped over, to all of a sudden Arthur is to just wake up to realize, oh my god, like I'm falling. Because the whole like a whole thing where you were to possibly fall out of your chair is to all of a sudden give people a knee-jerk reaction to then wake up from them, of course, sleeping. Because if you're a person like me that eventually is to go and sit in a chair, and you of course eventually are to be starting to doze off, because I have done that plenty enough times, where all of a sudden I don't realize that I dozed off, and then all of a sudden I start to feel like my body moving like somewhere or another, or it's like kind of moving in one certain direction, and then all of a sudden I wake up from that, realizing that my body is starting to move one way or the other, because there's possibly a certain item that was in my lap that fell off, or there was any number of items or whatever. Is just something as simple as like my body is falling forward or falling backward or whatever. So all of a sudden I just wake up from that. So I can understand what they're saying here, what they're trying to get at. Because eventually you just have that knee jerk reaction to wake up from your sleep to eventually realize what's going on with your body. So Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character Arthur is to go and take all of our characters and basically tie all of their bodies up and put them all into this elevator where he is to go on and is to put a bomb into the emergency brake system to where this elevator is to go flying down and is to, of course, give these people the kick or the kind of the jolt they need to wake up from their sleep. So now in between that, we end up having the the Mission Impossible mission that takes place in this snowy environment, which I don't actually know where this place actually is to have taken place for once. So let's just call it a facility because it's much easier. So Robert is to go on this mission and he's kind of be like the point guy because he really needs to go and break into this facility to open up this safe, and all the other characters are kind of defending Robert and going on to like snowmobiles and trying to eventually be decoys to get all of these henchmen somebody to just kind of take down to where Robert can go on to make his way to this big, massive safe that is to just lead him back to eventually opening up that smaller safe to get that idea of why he is to approach what he is to approach here. So we have everybody going on and defending against this place. And so all of a sudden Robert go on and need a quicker route to get to where he needs to go. And because Cobb is asking Iridian, hey, is there a shortcut through all of this crap? Shortcut through the maze? And so Iridian, or Elliot Page's character, is telling Cobb, it's well, I can't tell you that because you can't know. And Cobb's I don't care about knowing or not needing to know. You need to tell me now. You need to tell me, if there's a shortcut here. And Elliot Page's character does convince Cobb that there is a shortcut, that there is some kind of air duct thing that Robert can go into, that is to cut through a lot of this time spent. So Robert goes on to make his way to this facility to eventually have Robert and Ames go in to, and I'm kind of wondering, if I probably said any number of these characters' names wrong this whole time, because I don't remember exactly what Tom Hardy's name is in this movie. So if I ill pronounce it at some point, that's bound to happen. But really, the last thing that I probably remember when I do any review is honestly someone's name. That's unless it's some kind of comic book character that I've known the whole history about, and I know all the players because I've seen the movie a million times, then it's severely easy. If it's something that I've seen once or twice, then I'm Bob? So Robert makes his way to this vault to be taken down by Molly, who is to shoot him, and Cobb is to be a sniper that is kind of watching on and waiting for somebody to drop in so Cobb can shoot them, but he realizes that it's Molly, and Cobb just can't take the shot here because he still has that guilt over what he had done to Molly, and he is concerned that if he kills her in the dream, that he'll kill her forever. So he doesn't take the shot, and so Molly shoots now Robert, and so now we have to go even deeper into this thing to now have Elliot Page's character and Cobb go on and go into another level of Inception, because Cobb now has to go on and face his wife and finally admit all the guilt that he has ever had, and really eventually have this kind of moment where Cobb is confront Molly and just say, you know what, like, I'm done with this. I'm done with like kind of holding a torch for you, and like we've had such a life together, and so we finally just have a point where Cobb is to finally move on and not keep Molly locked up, and that Cobb is to realize that Molly is to deserve to move on. So Elliot Page's character is to go on and find, of course, Robert's body after Cobb has had this moment with Molly. So Elliot Page is to go and wake up Robert, and Cobb is to kind of be left by the wayside, because Cobb is to go on and say, well, by this time, Saito has to be dead by now. And so Cobb is to go on and find Saito in limbo and try and retrieve him and wake him up. So we go on and we seem to have everybody woken up at this point, and then eventually both Cobb and Saito are to be woken up in limbo at that castle, and Cobb is to say, it's like, well, hey, like, we're both old men, but now it's time for us to go back to our young bodies and live the rest of our lives. And so both Cobb and Saito wake up in their much more younger bodies, and Robert is to wake up, and nobody really says anything, but everybody just kind of looks at one another and like, yeah, we frickin' did it. Like, we pulled this off. So after this whole thing, nobody's like high-fiving or whatever. Everybody just all goes and starts all kind of making their separate ways from this airport. And Saito is going on and making phone calls to make it so that Cobb can make it back into the US. So when Cobb goes on to then, of course, make it into this airport, because Cobb has to mention to Saito, it's like, hey, like, you better, like, give me the ability to make it into this country, or I'm going to be arrested for the rest of my life. So Cobb makes it to the airport. They let him go, and Cobb makes his way back to Miles, who is to have Cobb's two kids. And we end up seeing them being much older kids than previous because some time has passed. Because uh, we find out that Cobb's kids is with uh, Cobb's wife's grandparents. And so when Cobb was trying to get them on the phone, they didn't want to be on the phone talking to Cobb. So, yeah. So Cobb goes on and is to now try and test whether or not that this is reality or whether this is a dream. And so Cobb goes on is to flip his little spinner, and Cobb goes on and hugs his kids and is to re-meet up with Miles and just talk things out. And the spinner is still spinning. The little toy is still spinning. And then the movie just ends to where we're kind of like wanting to decipher any number of things here. Like, was Cobb really dreaming this whole time? Was the goal to get Cobb out of his out of his dream world, like them having to pry him out of this world because he was still there? Like, did this all really just happen? Like, was this more of a mission for Cobb than it was for Robert, and Robert was another person who was actually part of this mission, and Cobb wasn't aware of it the whole time, and they didn't want to tell, this team didn't want to tell Cobb that they were coming in to try and free him? We could have a number of scenarios playing out in this movie, but I want to have the idea that this was to be a real thing, that this was to be a real mission, and also like we were to give Cobb his closure moment. It is kind of interesting when Leonardo DiCaprio is to go on and tell people the truth that he didn't actually understand this movie, which I can understand that there's a lot of just people that go on and do some movie and they didn't understand what it was about. Like, Jake Gyllenhaal had done this movie called Velvet Buzzsaw, and he was like, yeah, I had no clue what that movie was about. Like, I have no clue. I just did the movie, but I was like, bah, I had no idea. Because Jake Gyllenhaal was going and doing some comic book shop interview where they were going and giving him a bunch of Mysterio comic books, like, I guess, gearing him up for his Far From Home movie that he had technically already did, but they're giving him Mysterio comic books anyways, I guess for him to probably autograph and sell off on eBay somewhere, probably. Like, hey, I'm Jake Gyllenhaal, here's a signed copy of this. I did this on some YouTube channel. Or maybe, yeah, he probably turned around and maybe, autographed them and just donated them all to a charity. Wouldn't that have been a nice thing to do? If he wasn't going to read all of them, but maybe he did want to read all of them because maybe he didn't do any research for the film, because there's a lot of times where a lot of guys do zero donut holes worth of anything as far as research goes. Like, when you go on and you ask any of the people, or probably half of the people from the X-Men movies, the original X-Men movies, with Hugh Jackman and James Marsden, most of those characters are like, yeah, I've never heard of this character before, or I never went on to do any research for this character, so I just kind of went in there blind, and I was like, oh, I'll just play me and see if that works out. And surefire enough, it did, to garner so many franchisable movies If that's even a word, franchisable. Nah, I doubt it. So yeah, I think that's all that I wanted to say here about this film. There might have been a number of things that I didn't go on and thoroughly, in depthly mention here, and I am kind of regretting that, thinking that possibly there is like a number of things that I probably had forgotten about here. But, and I always like to say that for every single review that I do, because I know there's something somewhere where I'm gonna have this like this irk in my brain to just be like, what was the one thing that I didn't say? Hence why I have such a huge hesitation of ending every single review that I do. Um, because there is always that thing in there, and like it, I can't do it. I just can't not like double check myself, like cross the T's and dot the I's. But otherwise, I feel okay about this one with leaving this off the way it is. So, with that said, there's never going to be rebuttal done because this isn't a movie franchise. Like, shows are easy to just rebuttal, to just like, oh yeah, I forgot about 12 different things. And so now I can talk about them in the next iteration of this, but I don't have that. So, I'm going to get out of here feeling good enough about this one. Let me know in the comments below about how you felt about Inception. And let me know how you would have thought that this movie was to end, because it kind of has that Castaway Tom Hanks kind of ending where he's kind of in like looking at those roads just trying to figure out where the heck he is to go at the end of that movie. And that's what it kind of feels like Inception is, where it's like how deep down, further down the rabbit hole do you think was all going on with this story? Because there's so many people that has so many kind of ways of which that they want to write off this story. So with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.